Welcome. My name is Gretchen Bulova, and I'm the director of the Office of Historic Alexandria. Thank you so much for joining us for the final presentation of the Historic Structures Report for the Murray-Dick-Fawcett House from our project consultants, Glavé Holmes Architecture. The City of Alexandria acquired the Murray-Dick-Fawcett House and Garden in 2017 with financial support from the Virginia Outdoors Foundation, the Virginia Land Conservation Fund, the Northern Virginia Conservation Trust, and then homeowner Joe Reeder. We are appreciative of the opportunity to work on this important site and want to acknowledge Joe Reeder for his stewardship and vision to preserve this historic house and garden. Thank you, Joe. As part of the sale agreement, Joe Reeder retained a life tenancy and continues to live in the home today. At this time, the garden is open to the public from 10 to 6 daily. Both the house and garden have easements. In 2021, we undertook extensive exterior work to preserve the building after discovering a major roof leak. This work included a new shingle roof, as well as a standing seam roof, chimney repointing, and siding, window, and woodwork renewal. The restoration contractor was Hank Handler of Oak Grove Construction, with support on the city side from Al Cox, retired preservation architect for the City of Alexandria. Their work was incredible and the detail is amazing, but it is just the beginning of our journey of turning this historic site into a City of Alexandria museum. Today, we will hear from our project consultants, Glavé Holmes Architecture, about this next step, the Historic Structures Report. I would also like to acknowledge that this report was generously funded by the Historic Alexandria Foundation. At this time, I am pleased to turn today's program over to the Glavé Holmes Architecture team, beginning with Susan Reed, Director of Historic Preservation. Susan?
Thank you, Gretchen. The Murray-Dick-Fawcett House is one of the oldest vernacular houses in Northern Virginia, and it retains an extraordinary amount of historic integrity. Originally constructed in 1772 and expanded over the next 250 years, it is on the National Register of Historic Places. As part of the city's efforts to create a house museum for public visitation, the first step is to conduct a Historic Structures Report, or an HSR. The primary objectives of this are to assess the existing materials and conditions of the house, summarize the history and the evolution of the building through time, and to make prioritized recommendations for repairs and historic interpretation. Our team included myself and Gibson Worsham from Glavé Holmes, along with Caleb McHugh, who did a lot on the document itself, Craig Swift from Spring Point Structural, who was assisted by Mary Douglas significantly, as well as Michael Galway from Loring, who was assisted by Mustafa Diak. And also, as part of introducing high technology into our historic building, we utilize the services of 3D laser scanning. So Prologue made a three-dimensional model of the entire structure, including down into the privities. We have covered every aspect of the project. And the agenda for this presentation, which will be led by Gibson Worsham, will take us through an overview of the contents of the HSR, from the history, the exterior recommendations, interior, and then the engineering recommendations, as well as touching on the preservation priorities. So Gibson will take it away.
Yes, thank you, Susan. This has been such a wonderful privilege for us to be involved at Fawcett, the Murray-Dick-Fawcett House. 1959, we see a really sharp view of the place as it existed during most of the 20th century and even earlier, 19th century. When it was still known as the Fawcett House. It's had many different names through the years. One of the main things that we were asked to do was to come up with a period of significance for the house. That kind of period of significance helps us to prepare interpretive plans to decide how to present the house in terms of paint and other features that we restore or remove. And in many cases, you'll come up with a single period of significance in which you focus all the attention, say at Colonial Williamsburg, where it's always in the immediate sort of pre-revolutionary period. Here, the restoration of the house is probably much more complex. Should be based, in this case, on a comprehensive interpretive design. Given the preservation of evidence from every period, from 1774 up to 2000, we would recommend, rather than a particular period of time, a wide-ranging period of significance, which includes the beginning of the house right up through the 19th century, at least through 1870. A lack of visible evidence of the last 100 years of the Fawcett descendants shouldn't, however, prevent us from bringing some of the things from that 20th century in as well. One of the things that we did in developing the structure was to create a priority matrix, which is what you see here on the left, an example of how that works. And then we have a drawing which brings all those different recommendations to the foreground with notes that relate to the matrix itself. Another thing we were really interested in doing was to understand better how the house has changed over time. And part of that is who's owned it, how it's been passed down from one family member to another. As you can see here, this is an extremely complex diagram of how the house moved through time. We also provided a timeline of the house itself and all of the changes, major changes that we were able to document from 1774 right through the current year. And now I'm going to briefly run through a sequence of the house's history. You can see the different phases that are color coordinated in the bottom, and then we see floor plans. In this case, of the first floor in the lower left, the possible outbuilding, kitchen outbuilding to the rear. We don't know where that would have been. We know there was one, and then the upper floor, which was divided into two chambers. This is 1774, when the house was essentially a two-room, what's known to scholars as a hall chamber house, where the main room for entertaining was the hall, was located next to which was heated and nicely furnished with cupboards flanking the fireplace. And then next to it was an unheated chamber, which was the sleeping room for the owner and his wife. In this case, mostly the wife's chamber, as we understand these rooms to have been used. It was sort of a private area where conversation, visitation could take place. And very soon after the original house, but within about 10 years, Patrick Murray, who built the original house, then added on a wing across the rear, which essentially duplicated those two front rooms at the back. And we believe that those rooms were each heated by a chimney based on an advertisement which Murray put in the paper. That there were three chimneys. In this case, we found evidence that one of those chimneys in the floor plan in the upper left corner of the floor plan was actually a corner chimney, and we'll be talking about that a little bit more. We're not sure where the chimney was on the other end of the house because the evidence has pretty much been obliterated. The third phase of the house involved some manipulation of that rear wing, cat slide roofed wing, as they call it, where the current chimney was placed. It's shown in pink. And then the basement, which had previously, I should mention that the first original building had a basement or cellar rather under the front part. And the rear wing did not have, as far as we can tell, anything but a very, very low crawl space. And then that was partially excavated in 1784 to 1797. At some point, a small area of that cellar was excavated. Then we see In 1797, the house changed hands after it had gone through an intermediate hands with Dr. Elisha Dick. It then changed hands for a longer term to a team of merchants, Ricketts and Newton. William Newton and his partner, John Thomas Ricketts, purchased the whole half acre on 1/4 of the block, and were able to then add on at the back a brick extension, which runs back to the end of the current lot, although the lot originally ran back farther. That it was actually a stable and warehouse building that had been built originally by Patrick Murray at the rear. And you can see that new wing is most unusual and interesting. It's really a gold mine of information about late 18th century urban life. We see that the lower part of that wing, which is colored in kind of beige, you see a room called the lobby. So that's what we've called it. We don't know the original name of it, but it seems to have not been heated. And it had a pantry in one corner. It closed off at the very beginning for storage of foodstuffs. It also had doors to each side of the wing, and it had windows to each side. It was rather well finished compared to the other rooms in the rear wing. It also included a staircase down to the cellar. And then right beyond that room was the kitchen, which was a large cooking fireplace, and a staircase that goes up to a set of 2 chambers where it was probably the living accommodations for the enslaved cook and her family or others. We see that the lobby probably was actually what we call the lobby was probably functioned in that way, as it offered circulation from both sides of the house and from the main house and back into the kitchen, and there may not have been any other door into the kitchen at that point, although a door has recently been cut through into these 2 service rooms that are to the north of the kitchen. We see the workroom on one side and the smokehouse on the other that are integral parts of that wing. The workroom was known later to the family as the washroom. We're not sure that was its original purpose, but it was for some sort of activity. It could have been a dairy where milk was kept, was cooled after milking. We also see the most unique feature of the house, the 3 privies, which has been theorized were set aside for enslaved people, men and women. And there's even a child cells hole in one of the 3 privies. You see also 2 stairways, basement entrances to the cellar under that rear wing. And we're postulating that there was originally one on the Prince Street front as well. As you can see from the drawing, the Prince Street front had not been excavated to its current height. At some point in the late 18th, early 19th century, the street was lowered and the front wall was replaced. The stone foundation in the front was replaced with brick. And then there must have been some arrangement that involved more steps up to the front door, which was in the center of the south facade. Here it is. We've lowered the street. This is approximately 1816 as a slice in time, because in that year, the new owner, the Brown family, new owners, had added this extension onto the eastern end of the house, which effectively creates a larger back chamber, a small portico, as the family called it in later years, which was entirely enclosed by louvered windows and doors, and then a small closet on the back, which was later made into a bathroom. There was a doorway in the front that must have been reached by some steps. We can see evidence of that. You can also see that original that was shown under the at the east end was filled in, and we also have an addition to the building at the back, which was labeled a stable on one of the maps. Here in 1854 to 58 was the next period in which major changes were made. And in this period, members of the Brown descendants actually, I should go back, sorry, I missed one thing I want to mention very clearly, and that was when the portico was added, which you see in that eastern extension. They also enclosed a passage, which gets you from the lobby out to the portico. So it's an L-shaped passage. And that was one of the reasons probably why they needed to enlarge that northeast chamber, was to make room for the passage. That made it possible for a person to come in the front door out of the portico, because that original front door was closed on the south side, and then process to any room in the house, including to the stairs to the upper floor, without going through any other rooms. This is a development in terms of the standards of privacy and ease of movement that people were demanding in the early 19th century and even in the late 18th century. So in this mid-19th century period, a few changes were made, but they were not terribly extensive. The porch, which was formerly located on the west side of the brick L, was enclosed to form pantries and storerooms. Another corridor was enclosed to connect the main frame part of the house with the kitchen, making the lobby even smaller, and potentially a water closet or toilet room was added in the upper left corner, feeding into the privy vault. There was a vault under the privy in which the waste was collected, which had to be emptied on a regular basis. So when water first became available, piped in water, often a water closet would then just simply empty, the waste would be emptied right into that same privy vault, that served the privies. The seventh phase was through the 20th century. Again, very few changes were made, but by 1971, we see that there was a garage and a wall added around the house in that period by descendants of the Brown family. And then the eighth phase was when the Joe Reeder purchased the building and did a lot of work on it. And what he mainly did was to add a new kitchen and an enclosed courtyard and a bath off the back of the 1784 frame section, infilling most of the east yard on the east side of the brick service wing. Otherwise, he maintained the house very much as it had always been. Here's a animation that helps you to see how the house changed. We prepared this as a kind of illustration. You can see the brick wing added there. There's the 1816 east extension, the lowering of the floor of the ground in front of the house, and then the walls, garden, and the kitchen addition. We'll run through that one more time so you can see it a second time. There's the warehouse in the back, and we can see the kitchen addition of 1797, the 1816 addition, the removal of the warehouse, and then the enclosure of the yard, and then finally at recent times the addition of that new addition at the back. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the exterior condition. Here we see the south elevation, and the south elevation is a complicated one from the point of view of trying to understand its history. In the lower center photograph, you'll see when Joe Reeder restored the front of the house, he pulled off beaded siding, which we believe was added in 1816, because we found evidence you can see in his photographs, evidence of the infill of the front door, which had once located at the center of the south facade. So when they infilled that door at the time that the door was moved to the east, on the portico of the east addition, they must have then covered the whole front of the building with beaded siding, narrow, overlapping beaded siding. Very different from this original flush beaded siding, which we see in the lower left-hand photograph and on the building today. That was restored. Much of it was simply cleaned up and some new elements made or moved around in order to create the seamless beaded flushboard facade you see today. Of course, that never actually existed when the front door, after the front door was removed, it was always covered with the beaded siding. But we have that gives us a little bit of a sense of the complexity of interpreting the building. The same beaded siding was added on the west end, which we'll see shortly. And then we see in the upper right-hand corner a photograph of the brick foundation, which was added when the street was lowered in the early 19th century. It's Flemish bond brick, and you can see the condition that that's in now. And we also see another very interesting feature. The dormers on the south front are very unusual. They're casement dormers, so they're extra wide. They're about a third again as wide as a typical dormer in this period. And the windows can be fully opened as casements. And then we see evidence in this photograph, and up until quite recently, in fact, there were shutters on those dormers, which is another very unusual feature that it hasn't yet been restored, but we're recommending that those shutters be restored as such an unusual and interesting feature of the house. The dormers were restored just in the last few years, very, very carefully done by the city, as we just heard from Gretchen. On the west elevation, you'll see a seam coming down between the 1784 and 1774 sections, and that seam indicates the division between the 1784 wide beaded flush board and the flush siding on the original. As you can see that in the photograph on the left, on the right, sorry, upper right. And then we can see details of the brick wing, including the removal here on the lower right of the enclosure of that west porch. And then the middle left, we'll see that porch as it was opened up and then recently restored more completely. And then we see the lower left, we see where a screened transom has been added over the door to that workroom that was known also as a washroom. So that suggests that there was some sort of need to have better ventilation in that room because of whatever purpose it was being used for. And then we see the transom, which when the doors were shut on the west privy, the light could enter through the transom, whereas the doors into the two workrooms originally didn't have transoms. Then we see one of the typical bulkhead openings to the cellar below the 1797 wing. And then we see the restored cornice detail that's on the right-hand side of the drawing above, where on the 1774, where the west and south walls meet. And here we have the east elevation. The east elevation is one that's very difficult to see in its entirety because of its placement. But there you see in the lower left the portico, and in the upper left as well, where it's lined with louvers. It has built-in benches, which are detailed very much like the pews in Christ Church and in other 18th century churches. It's a really typical decorative detail. And this porch would have served the same purpose, we think, as a center passage in a later house, so that many houses in Alexandria have either a center or side passage where wind would blow through. In the summer, it was a cooler place to be. You could sit and enjoy the breezes. And since this house didn't have a passage at all, we feel like this portico, as they called it, is kind of a unique example of a place for privacy and yet coolness, so that the people on the street would not necessarily see the folks who were sitting inside, but they could enjoy the cool and the breezes. Then in the middle of the left, you see the door sill of one of the workrooms. On both sides, you can see there that the work there's some damage to the bricks in those areas. And then we see at the lower right, 1930s Habs photograph showing the condition of the east side of that brick wing as well. The north elevation is even more difficult to actually get a clearer view of. You have to squeeze between the brick wall and the north wall of the brick wing. There's a wonderful photograph. There are only two of these that survived. It showed what the house, the back of the 1784 and 1816 sections looked like before the addition of the kitchen. the new kitchen in 2001. This is how it looked in the 1950s. And you see the two windows into that northeast bed chamber have shutters. And then this is the closet that is at the back of the 1816 wing, which is today a bath, a shower room. And then in the lower left, you'll see the kitchen, the 2002 kitchen wing with its really interesting and innovative double Dutch doors so that the whole thing can be thrown open to the small remaining east yard, or it can be closed during the inclement weather. You also see in the lower center, you see how there's this narrow space between the 1797 and the 2002 wings. And there's a lot of issues there with moisture and structural issues that have come up between the historic parts of the building and the 2002 wing. Structural engineer Craig has discovered or explained to us the degree to which this north end of the brick wall is compromised. It's actually bowing out and is going to need some work, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a minute. So our exterior recommendations for the building basically result from a condition assessment, and were developed to provide guidance to the city for this repair and restoration, particularly for the purposes intended of being a historic house museum. And we are making recommendations according to the historical period of each section of the house, as it's developed over time. The 1774 section has a number of interesting condition issues, and in many cases, the building is really in pretty good shape, we'll have to say, because of the work the city's done, but these are the specific areas that have not been addressed. The brick on the Prince Street front is painted and is in poor condition, and we would suggest that those bricks be repaired or replaced, as the case may be, and the mortar joints repaired where necessary. We also don't have a complete understanding of the historic paint history of the house. Normally you do a paint scraping and you put those beneath a microscope, and you can determine the history of the paint all the way around the house and on all the different parts of the house. We know a lot about it, but we don't know everything that we'd like to know. So we're also asking or recommending that additional paint analysis be done to provide better guidance for historic paint schemes. We also were interested in looking at the painted brick for the same reason. Do we want to repaint or want to clean the brick? The historic shutters, as we mentioned, are currently in storage from the secondary faces of this section of the building, and the missing shutters that are in storage, or the shutters that are missing from the dormers, should be replaced in kind or repaired and returned to their historic locations. The 1784 section, which you see basically where the red square is, includes a double window which was added in the early 20th century. We don't recommend replacing that with a single window, but rather retaining it as it contributes to our understanding of how the building changed over time. Otherwise, the west face of the house is now in pretty good shape after its recent repairs and pretty much complete restoration. The west side of the 1797 section has some mortar and brick masonry issues that we'd recommend using hand tools to remove some of the excess cement, stucco, and plaster that has been placed on the wall. The north wall is bowed outward and structurally compromised, so we would suggest even adding tie rods, which we'll see in the structural section. Stabilizing that north wall would be really important before we do any kind of excavation or demolition of the wall or any repair of the privies on the interior. We want to make sure that we follow our structural engineers' directions in order to do repair. Sidewalls are painted, and we want to consider whether to repaint or clean and remove the paint from the brick. Also want to remove and recaulk the joints between the brick and doors and window openings. The 1816 section, that north wall, as we described, included a closet, which now houses a modern shower room. And so when we're recommending the removal of the 2002 addition, and with that, the restoration of the siding and windows of the 1816 part of the building, including the northeast closet, where the window has been relocated and much of the siding is lost. So as we explore that and open it up, we'll be able to understand better how to rebuild the roof and move the windows and doors and apply the siding. And then we are proposing to remove that 2002 kitchen wing. That will allow us to make sure that the house can be interpreted more accurately and will protect the fragile structure of the building's remaining features, because we've had most of the damage has been done to the building in the last 40 or 50 years came from where this building was attached to the existing building. And we will no longer have those moisture infiltration issues. There are HVAC condensing units on the flat roof of that wing, and we'll have to come up with a scheme for relocating those units or removing them entirely. The garden and the garage, we want to make sure we have an ADA compliant entry sequence. We're talking about infilling the garage door on the alley side with a new design that's compatible, potentially lowering the garden wall so we'll have better visibility for security and for access, just visual access for enjoyment. And we want to simplify the planning so we can make better emphasis on the house itself and install paving instead of grass to reduce maintenance issues and to facilitate its use for events. Interior condition. And here it's a bit more complex on the interior, which has not been restored except in a few limited areas. Here we see the angles in the lower left-hand corner. You see that angled floorboard joint. That's where that corner fireplace, we believe, was. You can also see the structure for that in the upper left-hand photograph. And this right-hand photograph represents the hearth, the base and the hearth of the chimney that's shown in pink in the drawing to the left. And there we can see the evidence where that hearth was actually inserted and the chimney were inserted into the structure because of the way that the structure is made. The cellar is, first we'll talk about the 1774 cellar. You can see there the stone foundation with the supplemental brick front. You can see an arch support for the fireplace above, and you can see the inserted stair from 2002, as well as the original structure above. The 1784 wing includes what's called the milk room, which has its original floor. We believe that's the area that was excavated in the late 18th century under the previously unexcavated section of the building. And there are many complexities there, including a bricked up window that was previously a bricked up door, which must have led to the north from that section in its original form. And then in the kitchen cellar itself, too, we see another arched, relieving arch supporting the cooking fireplace above. We see this floor has been lowered in order to make it more accessible in 2002. So there's a new floor there. And you can see the stairs up to the outside are steep, and part of our plan will include making it a bit more accessible to the basement. Here on the first floor, we see the main room, which is in relatively good condition. You can see all the different interesting features, the beautifully detailed presses to each side of the handsome mantelpiece, and the wainscoting and molded trim. And you can see here one of the gas fixtures that was installed in the mid-19th century that still survives, including its shade. Those are all things we'll want to try to keep. We see where the door was originally cut through, and we can also see the fancy shaped shelving inside those closets and the decorative graining, which remains inside the closet doors, which would have been through this whole section of the house originally on all the doors. In the chamber beside the hall, we see some added cabinet work and the stairs to the basement inserted where there was once a closet. We see here the northwest chamber in the 1784 section with its, you can see some historic paint there, which has been uncovered with the removal of later wallpaper. So there's lots of different finishes that are potentially able to be cleared or cleaned or recreated. A lot of plaster damage. And here we are in the northeast bedchamber. The ceiling there has had some problems. And there's also in the back corner, there's a door that's been relocated from where its original location was, but that's something that we are intending to repair as well. And then inside that passageway that I mentioned that had been added to connect, you see the center upper picture is and the upper right picture is the inside of that east door onto the portico. And then the corridor stretches away from that. Now we're in the brick 1797 wing, and here we are in that lobby room, which is with its very nice finishes. And the corridor in the lower right that leads to the kitchen. And here we are in the kitchen. This kitchen has been heated with wood for the last 20 years, and it's very cozy in there. But you can see we've got some cleanup to do in terms of the brick and other materials. Here are the privies, and the lower left is the workroom, the washroom, and the smoke house is in the upper right. And then the privy itself, the vault, is, you can see it's curved, has curved curvilinear brick. And then the flooring and the seats in the privies are in really rough shape, and then the walls are as well. And here's the new wing with its new kitchen fireplace. Upstairs, we've got a small chamber in the 1774 section with its own little fireplace. You can see the famous original 1774 roof that's been covered up in 1784, which still survives in the attic. And we go to the 1797 chambers, and you see there's a small brick fireplace there, 2 rooms, and some rather intrusive ductwork in the smokehouse section. Interior recommendations. Basically, we're doing like we are on the exterior. We're taking into account the age and history of each section of the building. We're removing modern elements. We're cleaning and evening out floor finishes in the most historically sensitive way. We are removing all plumbing and plumbing fixtures from the house. We're patching the floor penetrations as neatly as possible and patching damaged plaster with matching materials. And we're also suggesting repainting or touching up paint until such time in the future as a complete paint scheme can be determined. Overall, then, we're also removing as many HVAC ducts as possible and relocating the registers and grills to make them as unnoticeable as possible, retaining those gas and electric fixtures from different periods, making sure they're wired correctly, and also suggesting additional paint analysis to give us more information about repainting. In the 1774 section, we were removing that stair to the cellar, patching inappropriately pointed and plastered walls using hand tools. There's a well in that 1774 section, and we're talking about excavating it and reinforcing the top for safe and historically appropriate interpretation. We're also doing the same things in the 1784 section, plus we're repairing that historic slat wall, which separates the storage area known as the milk room from the rest of the cellar. That's a early 19th century or late 18th century slatted storage wall to protect the contents of the storeroom. Sagging roof joists and ceiling in the northeast chamber will need to be raised and leveled. And the 1797 section will keep the 1797, the 2002 lowered brick floor, redo the walls as in the other sections, enlarge the west cellar entry so that there's better accessibility for visitation. I don't have a photograph of it, but we have the 1950s doorbell chime in one of the back passages, and we're suggesting keeping that and retaining and restoring all the interior trim and surfaces. Privies, The biggest problem there is that we have only one brick thick. The partitions between the workrooms and the privies are just a single width of brick, which means that they are very fragile and they have seriously compromised. You can see details there of the spalling off, the plasters that spall off, the bricks are crumbling, and the walls have large holes in them. So this entire area needs to be structurally reviewed and then reconstructed as carefully as possible to not lose any historic context. Also, infill the door between the workroom and the smokehouse that was opened in 2002, and supply security hardware and new lighting for all these areas, because right now the privies are just wide open and we'd like to have them be more secure. In the 1816 section, relocate that door to its original location that leads into that now shower room, but which will eventually be interpreted as a closet or storeroom. And then the garage doors will create some partitions within the garage, including a small lobby, toilet room, or rooms, and a tiny catering kitchen. It's not a very large space, but it can be a really useful space for serving the functions and purposes that the city has for the building. Our engineers' recommendations, we've already talked about the privy area, interior and exterior. We do have some foundations and moisture intrusion in the 1784 section, and we also have very seriously compromised floor structure in that 1784 section where the chimney had been removed, and there's a lot of deflection there as well. And the same thing is true in the area around the kitchen in the 1797 section. And all of those need to be carefully examined and repair design executed, with the privy as the very first priority. Craig and the Spring Point team have also rated our floor loading so that we know approximately what is allowed. And you can see here some of their suggestions for repairing the structural capacity of the first floor. HVAC, we've got three options. The first option would include replacing the existing systems, including the equipment removed from the 2002 edition. This would retain, however, the radiant floor heating loop. The building is heated by a heating loop that's under the wooden first floor, so that it's essentially a kind of radiant heat. The HVAC upgrade option 2 would include replacing the existing systems, including the heating loop, and its replacement with an additional all-air system located in the cellar. So we would essentially have a completely new HVAC system, forced air. And the HVAC upgrade option 3 would be similar to both option 1 and 2, except that then we would involve, instead of having air-cooled condensing units either on grade or on the roof, we would our engineers, Loring, have recommended installing a geothermal well field system to provide both heating and cooling for the house. And then you would no longer have that need for HVAC equipment. That's a high ticket item, comparatively speaking. Electrical, if we need artificial light, and I think we'll need to update the electrical system with new wiring wherever possible, or testing any existing wiring. And if it's classified as a commercial building, according to the city, then load centers would need to be replaced with panel boards, and a new electrical service would be sized to support power to the garage and the house. Plumbing, all the plumbing fixtures and plumbing will be removed, and some plumbing added to the garage. And if it is determined that a sprinkler system is the best option for long-term preservation of the house, then a separate domestic water and water supply only to the detached garage would be then provide a dry pipe system to protect the house. That's the kind of system where, unless it's triggered, there's no water in the system, so you don't have the risk of water just streaming in if one of the sprinklers happens to malfunction. We've prioritized all those lists, and the list of the recommendations we made. So you can see here we have a chart, and those are based on 3 priorities within 1 year. Those are urgent threats to the building fabric, and or where we need to do investigation and testing in order to develop our design for the number 2 and 3 repairs and restoration projects. Priority number 2 would be something we're going to do within 3 years. Those would be improvements and repairs to the building's exterior envelope. And priority number 3 would be within 5 years, would be interior repairs, minor exterior repairs, and maintenance items not included in the list. So the first priority here would be repair the privy, smokehouse, and workroom walls, floors, and seats. Repair the privy vault masonry and structure. That, as I remind you, that's the underground pit that's oval in shape, made of brick, and it's still there, and it's in just considerably deteriorated, including the structure that spans it, the wooden and steel structure that's been added over it. And then it would be bracing those areas of the house to permit the use of the main floor as a museum and permit visitation. We'd also be removing all the plumbing and the plumbing fixtures and patching the walls and floors, touching up damaged paint and plaster on the interior, cleaning and repairing all the hardware, repairing the flooring where it's damaged. And we're proposing to clean and even out the floor finish by a very careful buffing rather than doing any sanding, which would be very destructive to the floors of their patina, which is part of it. The house's charm is all of its age and patina. Second priority within 3 years would be to remove that 2002 addition, patch the connections from that addition to the house, and make all the floor structure repairs needed to render the house usable as a museum. Comprehensively make those repairs rather than simply bracing up the floor. Repairing and replacing damaged masonry units and mortar joints, and cleaning or repainting the painted sections of brick on the front of the house and on the rear wing. Repairing the damaged plaster, excavating the cistern and reinforcing the top for safe and appropriate interpretation. That's that well or cistern that's in the front of the house. Minimizing and relocating HVAC ducts and other HVAC equipment. Leveling the ceiling of the northeast chamber, or at least blend it into the existing ceiling. Cleaning the 1784 attic and securing the flooring. That's the area where the shingles are visible from the 1774 building. And then removing the surface mounted wiring, and retaining and rewiring all the existing fixtures. It also suggested that within 5 years, repairing, replacing the missing shutters, removing that modern stair from the cellar, and patching the floor and floor structure of that, as well as doing some additional dendrochronological and paint analysis services. So in addition to the paint analysis we've talked about, we've also had in the past some dendrochronological work done, which is where the wooden structure is, samples are taken and then using special computerized microscopic examination of the tree rings, it's possible to match it to other samples with known dates and to be able to date when the trees were cut. And we have that that's how we have the dates for the main 3 sections of the building, the 1774, the 1784, and the 1797, but we really have not confirmed the date with dendrochronology for the 1816 edition. We've used saw marks. We've used the connection of that building with the other parts of the building. We can see where the paint has been added or not added according to after that wing was added. So we have a really good sense of when it was built, but paint, having a dendrochronology for that and also for parts of the west porch to help us date that would be very useful in our interpretation. I'm going to turn it over to Susan at this point.
Thank you, Gibson. This has been an incredible privilege to get to examine such an important historic resource so closely, and we have learned so much and look forward to seeing the next steps. The Murray-Dick-Fawcett House is going to be a stunning restoration for the community once the city has continued this process. So thank you very much to the City of Alexandria.
Well, thank you, Susan, and thank you, Gibson, for the very detailed report of all your findings. This report can be found on our project website on AlexandriaVA.gov/historic. And I hope that you'll stay in touch with our project by checking in periodically on the project page. I'd like to also thank, in addition to the amazing team with Glavé Holmes Architecture, I'd like to thank our Historic Alexandria project team, Eleanor Breen, our city archaeologist, Ben Skolnick, our city archaeologist, Chao Joy Yu from the Department of Project Implementation, Haroon Hussain with the Department of General Services, Melanie Gonzalez, our Historic Alexandria Preservation Manager, and Sue Kovac-Schumann, who was the research historian for this project. So thank you all for all you've done to complete a historic structures report for the Murray-Dick-Fawcett House. Our next step is to develop a comprehensive plan, which we are pleased to also be doing with Glavé Holmes. And between the historic structures report and the comprehensive plan, these two guiding documents will serve as the foundation for the development of this site in the next, couple of years as a museum. And we're very pleased that this will be sometime in the future our 9th museum for the Office of Historic Alexandria. So again, thank you for joining us today. Again, please visit our project page regularly to stay up to date on the Murray-Dick-Fawcett House. Thank you. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today. We really appreciate the time you took to listen. We have a great group with us today, and you all hung in there through the whole presentation. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and bring on our project consultants, our team, to answer questions. Please put some questions in the chat. We also have the Q&A function open. If you have questions after this, by all means, go ahead. Most of you know exactly where our office is and have my email. Be sure to drop us a note. This is just the beginning of our work on this real treasure, this real asset in historic Alexandria. So let me go ahead and bring over some of our project team members. And again, if you have some questions, please put them in the chat. We have a compliment in the chat, which I really appreciate from Sue. Right, we should have our project team members here. Again, Craig, Spring Point, Michael, with Loring, and then we have some of our historic Alexandria staff, Eleanor Breen and Ben Skolnick. So does anybody have any questions for our amazing group today? So nothing like starting with a tough question, Gail. We have a question from Gail Rothrock, who's a member of our Historic Alexandria Resources Commission, asking about the project budget for the next few years. Well, we have had funds designated from the City of Alexandria through the Department of General Services to do the exterior renovation. And as I said in the beginning, this report itself was generously funded by the Historic Alexandria Foundation. So at this point, with these, with the HSR and the comprehensive plan funded, the exterior work 90% done, and we just received a grant thanks to the Historic Alexandria Foundation to do dendrochronology on a few key elements that we still have questions, or Gibson still has questions on about when those features were built. We're going to have to regroup and start with our budget all over again. So we will be seeking grants, private donations, and city funds in the next budget cycle. So that was a really long answer. So I hope that meets your needs, Gail. Would anyone else like to ask anything? I appreciate the great audience we have today, members of the community, our other museums here in town, local historians. We really appreciate you joining us. And again, please stay up to date on our project page. The Historic Structures report is posted. This presentation will be posted as well. And as we work through our comprehensive plan, the slides and notes from each meeting are posted on our page as well. So. All right. Well, thank you for joining us. Again, thank you to Glavé Holmes for all their work and the fact that we did this project in about a year's time. I think a lot of accolades need to be given because this was a very complicated house to decipher chronologically. And while our questions aren't all answered, this has given us a tremendous foundation. So thank you all for joining us today, and we hope to see you soon at the Murray-Dick-Fawcett House. Thank you.